Today on NewsWatch, Vladimir Putin flexing his muscles across the Middle East, but why? We'll explore his endgame and its connection to saving Syria's dictator. Plus,
we feel very strong that, we need to stand strong in this, and we need, if we just hand it over, then we're giving up this fight. We're giving in and we're saying, okay, you win. And we're not standing up for the next person.
They refused to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and now they are being asked to pay steep fines. See why they refuse to pay or to back down from their beliefs. And working to rebuild, CBN lends a helping hand after natural disaster in Guatemala, and you can join the relief effort. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. President Obama is again being forced to defend his Syria policy. It comes as evidence mounts his plan to fight ISIS is failing. Dale Hurd is on the story.
Russian President Vladimir Putin mocked Barack Obama's Syria policy on Russian TV Sunday, saying the U.S. should have given him $500 million, and he could have used it more effectively than America to fight terrorism in the Middle East. Then he suggested the U.S. join his effort to fight ISIS. President Obama admitted on CBS 60 Minutes Sunday that he's failed so far in his policy in Syria, but bristled at the suggestion that Vladimir Putin has taken the lead in the Middle East.
You said a year ago that the United States, America leads, we're the indispensable nation. Mr. Putin seems to be challenging that leadership.
In what way? Let's think about this.
Well, he's moved troops into Syria, for one.
Yeah.
He's got people on the ground.
Right.
Two, the Russians are conducting military operations in the Middle East for the first time since World War II.
If you think that running your economy into the ground and having to send troops in order to prop up your only ally is leadership, then we've got a different definition of leadership.
The president went on to say his definition of leadership was taking the lead on fighting climate change. Meanwhile, Russia is expanding its influence in the Middle East by selling Iran a new surface-to-air missile system that it can use to defend its nuclear program. And that comes as Iran has just test-fired a new long-range missile that can hit Israel and U.S. military bases in the region. While President Obama continues to insist that Vladimir Putin's strategy in the Middle East won't work, Putin keeps advancing in what was once America's area of operation, the Middle East, making that region and the world potentially much more dangerous. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Iran's parliament approved the outline of the bill on the nuclear deal with the U.S. and other world powers. The landmark agreement would curb Iran's nuclear program in return for the lifting of international sanctions. The measure also allows Iran's government to withdraw from implementing the agreement if sanctions aren't lifted. Final approval of the deal is expected later this week. Leaders like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are against the deal, warning it could pose serious risks to both Israel and to the United States. Meanwhile, Washington Post reporter Jason Rasan, who had been held in Iran on espionage charges, has now been convicted. He could face 10 to 20 years in prison, but details of the verdict have not been confirmed. Republicans are still scrambling to fill the Speaker of the House position after Boehner's unexpected resignation, but there was a glimmer of hope this weekend as the name Paul Ryan seemed to resonate among party members. Republicans have struggled to come together to support any of the candidates for the job, but the party may be willing to pull together behind Ryan. A congressman hoping to get the job is even showing his support.
I'm a huge fan of Paul Ryan.
He'd be an amazing speaker.
I did everything except carry his gym bag this morning, trying to get him to do it.
The only catch, Ryan says he is not interested. Even with the party running out of time, Ryan has not said whether pressure from his peers will finally convince him to run. Chicago's Catholic Archbishop is joining President Obama in calling for more gun laws after the Oregon shooting and street violence in Chicago. But Republican presidential candidate Governor Bobby Jindal said this weekend new gun laws aren't the answer. Jindal says what America really needs is a spiritual revival. He cites America's moral decay and lack of respect for life in violent movies, TV shows, song lyrics, and video games. Jindal says fatherlessness is another big part of the problem that needs to be addressed. Aaron and Melissa Klein's refusal to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding led to huge business losses and an order to pay $135,000 in damages. And they could still face more financial claims. But as Abigail Robertson reports, the Kleins believe taking a stand to protect their constitutional right to religious freedom is more important for the sake of others who may face the same fight in the future.
It's been a tough few years for Aaron and Melissa Klein. They've lost their bakery, faced relentless harassment, and now may see their home and wages taken if they do not pay a $135,000 fine for refusing to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Despite the hardships, the parents of 5 young kids plan to keep fighting.
We feel very strong that, we need to stand strong in this, and we need, if we just hand it over, then we're giving up this fight. We're giving in and we're saying, okay, you win. And we're not standing up for the next person.
That's why the couple won't set a national precedent for future religious liberty cases by just handing over the money. Aaron says that the irony in their case is that the same-sex couple, who were returning customers to the bakery, have publicly said they don't want the money. This is not about the money, and that the only person who wants to see the $135,000 fine change hands is the Oregon Labor Commissioner. Even though the case is under appeal, Aaron and Melissa have been ordered to pay the fine. The state has not yet seized the couple's accounts or enforced any property liens, but that could change any day. Even if that day comes, the Kleins will not give up their fight to protect the religious liberty of all Americans.
I constantly think about the next person in line that this is going to happen to, and if we don't stand up for them, what's going to happen?
We're going to continue to stand firm and fight this, and like Melissa said, we're not going to set precedents by just giving the money and then hoping that we get it back if we win on appeal.
Aaron and Melissa are asking for prayers for their family, their marriage, and most importantly, that God would soften the hearts of all government officials involved in their case and cases like theirs, that they may finally see an end to this ongoing ordeal. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abby. Turning overseas once again, investigators in Turkey are working to find out who was behind the horrific bombing this weekend in Ankara, saying it might have been ISIS. The twin explosions killed 95 people, ripping through a crowd of activists rallying for peace in the Turkish capital. Meanwhile, the Pope offered a silent prayer Sunday for what he described as a terrible slaughter. The Army sergeant who abandoned his post in Afghanistan is getting off easy. That's what a former member of Bowe Bergdahl's platoon says. This weekend, the Army recommended Bergdahl face a lower-level court-martial and be spared jail time. Josh Quarter is angered that Bergdahl isn't getting any jail time. He says Bergdahl is to blame for the deaths of several soldiers who searched for 45 days for him. Commanding officers also testified the search put soldiers in danger, but the Pentagon said there's no evidence anyone died in the search. The commanding general of the U.S. Army Forces Command will decide the case. Terror continued in Jerusalem Monday morning when an Arab attempted to stab a police officer at Lions Gate in the Old City. That is the third stabbing at the gate in a little over a week. The terrorist was shot and killed. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is facing a wave of terror from systematic incitement over the Temple Mount. He mobilized 16 Border Police Reserve units over the weekend to squelch terror in the country.
It is better to mobilize massive forces to deal with possible developments rather than to do so after the fact. And we will call up more forces as necessary.
In northern Israel, an Arab Israeli rammed his car into Israelis and then got out and started stabbing them Sunday evening. 4 people were wounded and the terrorist captured. Earlier in the day outside Jerusalem, a female terrorist set off a car bomb by the side of the road, burning 1 police officer and seriously injuring herself. Saturday, 5 Israelis were wounded during 2 stabbing attacks near Jerusalem's Old City. The European nation of Belarus has a new president, but critics say it is just another rigged election. Jennifer Wishon has the story now from Minsk.
When Belarusians went to the ballot box, it was really just an exercise. Everyone knew who would win.
This year marks 21 years since Alexander Lukashenko took power and the 5th presidential election since he drastically rewrote the nation's constitution. He has a history for silencing, even jailing his political opponents.
He ran against 3 candidates, but Lukashenko's major opposition leaders chose not to run.
The major reason for this is that in 2010, 7 candidates were imprisoned, were arrested rather, after elections. So people are just not willing to risk their lives running for office.
Valery Kavaluski is a Belarusian who used to represent his country as a diplomat to the U.S. He resigned when Lukashenko ran for a 3rd term, violating Belarus's constitution. And 10 years ago, he found out how Lukashenko treats his political dissidents.
You were jailed for 2 weeks, you said, in a KGB prison.
Yes.
Belarus is the only former Soviet country to maintain the name KGB, which to Americans I think sounds very ominous.
It sounds very ominous to Belarusians too.
Yeah.
Because it retained the same practices, the same approaches, the same perception by the population that they're omnipresent and they're the mightiest organization in Belarus that can follow you and go after you at any point of time.
It may be why few Belarusians have cross words about their ruler.
I think that despite the fact that many people criticize Mr. Lukashenko for certain mistakes, he provides stability and security for our country.
Stability is perhaps Lukashenko's strongest selling point, considering Russia's aggression in neighboring Ukraine, especially now that President Vladimir Putin wants to build a Russian military base in Belarus.
We see that Russia uses such bases to occupy countries. They annexed and occupied Crimea from Ukraine using the same approach.
As part of his iron grip, the Lukashenko regime intimidates evangelical Christians. Any faith outside the nation's state-controlled Orthodox Church faces problems. But not everyone wants change.
The Americans should stop listening to so-called political experts who think we don't have enough freedom. We have enough freedom, and I would personally shorten it a little bit.
Why should Americans care what happens in Belarus?
Belarus is strategically located. It's a gateway. It's located on this junction of Eastern and Western civilization. So this territory should better be kept peaceful.
Lukashenko now begins another 5-year term as president. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Minsk, Belarus.
Coming up, responding to tragedy, how CBN is bringing relief to victims of a mudslide in Guatemala. Guatemala is in mourning after the death of hundreds of people due to an avalanche. CBN's Guatemala office responded to the disaster by sending teams to lend a helping hand to hundreds of victims. Javier Bolanos has more.
After the tragedy in the community of Santa Catarina Pinula, the rescuers have put forth a lot of effort to find the missing ones. The houses were buried approximately 10 to 15 meters. This is making the search and rescue efforts more difficult. As time goes by, the possibility of finding survivors decreases, but some have not lost hope. We are here providing aid, and we are looking for the children of a sister from our church, trusting God that they are still alive. Those affected remain in government-issued shelters.
I cannot explain what happened. At one point it just happened. In a little while, all the houses were buried.
The help is arriving from all corners of the nation, mainly food, water and clothes, which are stored for distribution by the rescue teams. Despite having material aid available, the spiritual necessities are great and are hard to supply. And that's why CBN Guatemala has sent a group of counselors to heal the soul.
The spiritual need persists. That is why the CBN team, along with their counselors, are already working with the people, giving them words of love and hope, and especially praying for each one of them.
Prayers play an important role.
que así como ella está poniendo sus manos vacías delante de ti, tú las puedes llenar para la...
The children also receive emotional support through games from the Superbook that remind them of the love of Jesus. All this with the goal of providing relief after the loss of hundreds of lives. Javier Bolaños, CBN News.
In a nation where Bibles once had to be smuggled, Christian bookstores are now thriving. George Thomas takes us inside this daring outreach in communist China. Next. In China, owning a Bible was once illegal. For decades, missionaries smuggled tons of Bibles and other Christian literature into the communist country. But now things have changed. George Thomas tells us why in this story from Beijing.
This is a budding industry, just like the first light of dawn.
In the world's most populous nation,
there is still a lot of darkness here that is suppressing the light.
Technically still communist and officially atheist,
we have seen God open the doors, and He wants us to be a light.
Comes the story of a mission to reach China's masses with God's word.
God wants us to be like the light of dawn, and as that light grows brighter, the darkness will recede.
Joseph Tui is a pioneer of sorts. In 2004, he opened one of China's first legally registered Christian bookstores.
Life was very difficult when we first started. The bookstore was practically sustained with money from many secret brothers and sisters in the Lord.
Tui says Christian books were scarce and anyone caught with a Bible went to prison. Still, missionaries smuggled Bibles and other Christian literature into the country, putting themselves at great risk.
Christians used to come to my bookstore in those early days, asking all kinds of questions like, do you have this book? Do you have that book? Do you have books written by these authors, that author? After hearing several no's, they would say, what kind of bookstore is this?
Government attitudes began to shift about 15 years ago when authorities noticed how many Chinese people were turning to Christ. This led to less restrictions on publishing companies. It also gave birth to a small industry of which Xu Qixing was excited to join. In 2002, he opened the first Christian bookstore in Shanghai, called Stairs to Heaven.
When we opened, we only had one book in each section of the shelves, altogether 50 books, each on the shelf with a gift product on either side. We would feel so happy when one book was sold out.
That same year, Chen Xiaoping opened her shop called Jehovah Nissi in the port city of Xiamen.
We knew bookstores could be a very good platform to reach people, better than many other places because you get to know people's spiritual needs.
Yue Gang also sensed a spiritual opening. He started small in the basement of his house and then in 2002 opened what is officially the first Christian bookstore in Beijing called Stream Bookstore.
We got the name from Psalm 1, which says, if a tree is planted by the water, its leaf does not wither. Our bookstore is like a tree, which can only grow with God's watering and care. We invest a little, but our spiritual returns are many.
Since then, Christian bookstores have flourished.
There are about 250 licensed Christian bookstores today operating in China, but many of them quickly realized that in order to survive and thrive, they had to change technologically.
My mother would ask me, you've been losing money since you started the company. What the heck are you doing? But I knew I had to do it, despite the financial risks.
In 2008, Wang Shaipei started the first online Christian bookstore in China. Like the others, starting out wasn't easy, but Wang persevered.
I prayed about it for 8 months. The more I prayed, the more I was sure of God's guidance. I knew the church and the gospel in China were rapidly changing, so it was the right time for promoting the ministry of the word.
Christian bookstores have now become a place of active evangelism and outreach.
In bookstores, you get to know all kinds of people from different places. You can help people connect with each other, make new friends, and bless each other.
We're not in this to make money. We don't have a high input-output ratio, but this is about an investment into the souls of men.
Still, Xu and others say the Christian publishing door is not completely open, and significant challenges remain.
2 years ago, Chinese authorities dealt a huge blow to Christian bookstore owners, severely restricting the number of Christian titles that could be published each year.
It dropped from 200 titles a few years ago to 80 last year. As of this year, the government has only issued 20 titles.
The government is worried that giving us more publishing titles could greatly increase the number of Christians and could somehow impact social stability of our country. However, I think the authorities know that the growth of Christianity actually makes our society better, and eventually they will change their attitudes.
Despite these challenges, Wang and others press on, knowing God is moving in China. And all they have to do is to remain faithful.
God will continue to hold us up by His grace and hold us until we complete the great vision.
George Thomas, CBN News, Beijing.
Today marks the start of another week for many people, so it is nice to bring a little Monday motivation to you as you face obstacles and challenges. Thank God for them always, because praise inside of your problem positions you to receive His promise of victory. With that, keep those hands extended upward and operate from a place of victory, because it is always yours. And that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. We hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a marvelous Monday. We'll see you back here tomorrow.